As we hit the halfway point of 2024, supercars are back in action this weekend in the northern half of Australia, this time at the Townsville Street Circuit. A great little regional event on the calendar that's actually celebrating its 15th anniversary this weekend. As always, I'm here to tell you everything you need to know before the cars hit the track, so let's jump into the preview. So our battleground this weekend is the Reid Park Street Circuit, a hybrid circuit actually, that's part streets, part purpose built, and as a result I feel it is a modern classic. It's 2.8 kilometers in length or 1.7 miles in a clockwise direction with 13 very unique corners, and I'd put the risk rating around here at about medium due to that combination of the risk of a street circuit but also the freedom and breathing room that you get with more purpose-built racetracks. The lap gets underway with a very long run to the first real corner, although turn 1 is technically this bend off to the right, not something you notice all that much once you're into the rhythm of racing, but on lap 1 where the pack's all bunched up and you're full of fuel, it is actually a bit of a hairy moment in the race. The first real corner though is turn 2, and boy do we see some drama down here. It's very wide on the entry, but then it funnels up on the exit, and that feeds you up to turn 3, probably the most traditional street circuit style corner on this track. Very tight, a 90-degree right-hander off down to the more purpose-built sections of the track. You more or less ignore turn 4 before you get into some fast sweepers through turn 5 off to the left, then turn 6 off to the right. Then you slow things down a little bit through a very tight little technical chicane at 7 and 8. More or less ignore turn number 9, but that feeds you into turn 10, probably my favorite corner on this layout, and it's a great little bumpy ride that sets you up into the overtake zone of turn 11. Turn 12, once again, you certainly notice that once the tyre wear kicks in, but your next real and final corner is the left-hander hairpin at turn 13, which feeds you back onto that big long front straight. In terms of spots to watch, I always feel like I'm cheating a little listing the effective turn 1 on any racetrack, because we often see dramas no matter what venue we're racing at. However, I do want to make an exception for turn 2 at Townsville, because I feel like it attracts not only your usual lap 1 incidents, but it just seems to attract some pretty crazy moves from the drivers. I'm not sure if it's because of its really long run into there, also the fact the road is quite wide, but for whatever reason we see big dive bombs on the opening lap and often restarts as well. So definitely keep an eye out for some chaos down there. And shortly after that we have our next spot to watch, turn 3. I mentioned this is very tight, and the real risk of this one is actually putting yourself in the outside wall, whether you make a mistake by yourself or if you get pushed out by another driver. There's some tire barriers there that suck you in, and it can leave you stranded in front of the field. We saw Scott Pye have a lucky escape there a few years back. Now, my final spot to watch is actually 2, and they're separated by a corner, but we've got 11 and 13. 11 is a great overtaking location around here, but what I love about their street circuit is we can often see those battles continue into 13, and we've seen some pretty desperate moves over the years to either try and execute an overtake or get a position back. So yeah, I really enjoy the action through this sequence of the lap. The format this weekend also means we're going to see plenty of supercars action on the track. It gets underway on Friday with the first practice session at 12:15 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. That's followed by another practice later in the afternoon, but the action heats up as it always does going into Saturday, with qualifying in the morning, a top 10 shootout around lunchtime, and the first 250-kilometer race starting at 2:40 p.m. in the afternoon. We more or less copy and paste that format into Sunday, just tweak the timings a little bit for some of the sessions. Quali in the morning, top 10 shootout at lunch, and once again another 250-kilometer in the afternoon. This is one of the longer formats in the racing, which means we're going to see a lot more strategic variance. Fuel's also going to be a factor again, so lots to look forward to, and the racing should be a lot more three-dimensional than what we've seen in recent rounds. In terms of supercars headlines, it feels like it's been a little bit on the quiet side since Darwin, but the biggest news in recent weeks, in my opinion, actually dropped on the Darwin weekend, and that's that the West Australian government has pretty much confirmed its plans to investigate and almost certainly pursue the supercar street circuit in Perth, most likely around the Burswood Park near Optus Stadium. If you haven't seen my video already, I've actually proposed some different layouts in that region, so be sure to check that out. I'll link it in the description. And while this announcement isn't confirmation it's going to happen, it's certainly a very big sign, and the most serious sign we've had in decades that a street circuit may indeed happen here in Western Australia. Another key headline is that the Grove Racing Camp, they have finished their very long renovation process at their HQ, so it'll be interesting to see if their new facilities allow them to build up some momentum, because they have been a little bit shaky to say the least, up and down throughout 2024. And then finally, on the day I'm recording this, actually, Supercars announced and released the first episode of a new podcast series called Drivers Only. The first episode, I had to listen to it today. It's got Davey Reynolds, Thomas Randall, and Ryan Wood on the microphones, and I thoroughly enjoyed it and would recommend giving it a listen. Now, it's caused a little bit of a stir among the fan base because Supercars announced this as raw and unfiltered, yet in the first 2 minutes, Davey Reynolds admits they had to cut the first episode because of some things he said that they didn't want out there in the public domain. So that has ruffled up a few feathers among the fans, but I think if you can accept some things are always going to be managed, unfortunately, to a degree in terms of PR and image and all that kind of stuff, there's actually still a lot of gold here that they do delve into. They go off in every direction. They touch on formats, the racing from Darwin, where they'd like to see Supercars go into the future, the Perth Street Circuit. It's a very chaotic but funny and enjoyable conversation. I do think there's some gold in here, and I'm looking forward to more. In terms of Gen 3 watch, one of the talking points out of Darwin was the fact that some of the Chev engines had some reliability issues. They've investigated and found the source of that issue. There was a revised design on the crankshaft thrust bearing, and that appears to have failed on a few of the cars. So that's now been rectified ahead of Townsville this weekend. And the other big ticket item, the bigger one in my opinion, is that the new Dunlop tyre has been tested. Fingers crossed we see this next year. Apparently it's intended to offer the grip of the current soft tyre, but more longevity than we currently have. And fingers crossed that allows the drivers to push harder for longer. As for the headlines this weekend, as I mentioned at the top, Supercars are celebrating their 15th anniversary of the Townsville event, and they will celebrate partly with another track to town, which will continue this weekend. Great to see that concept carrying on throughout the season. Of course, the storylines, the most important ones, are on the track though, and I'm really curious to see how that Red Bull battle evolves this weekend. The drivers have been very close and very clean so far, but we're starting to get to the pointy end of things in the championship, and I'm curious to see how that battle starts to ramp up. Of course, they've got competitors up and down the grid. I'm curious to see how Walkinshaw, Andretti United and Tickford recover after a pretty horrendous Darwin. They both got victories in Perth, and then it all came undone at the last event, so I'm sure they'll look to bounce back this weekend. And then my final storyline to follow actually takes a look down to Super 2, something I don't do in detail in these videos, but I do want to give a shout out to Cameron McLeod, who is back on track in the Dunlop series this weekend after his massive rollover in Perth a few weeks back. He's back on track, he's okay, and they've resurrected the car as well, so a big shout out to the effort from that team. Alright, let's start wrapping this up with some predictions. As always, don't take these too seriously. I just like to throw some things out there and see what sticks. Starting with my first prediction, which is a Red Bull double win. Whether this is a single Red Bull driver dominating both races or them sharing a victory each, I'm not sure, but Red Bull have a very strong track record around Townsville. My second prediction doesn't have an awful lot of logic behind it. It's just a feeling that Grove might get a podium. They've had highs and lows so far this season. Matt Payne clearly has a pretty good knack for street circuits, so fingers crossed they get a good result this weekend. And then my final prediction, once again, I tend to finish with a negative prediction for some reason, but the main game will see a pile up. We've seen plenty of pile ups in Super 2 around Townsville, not all that many in Supercars, so I'm predicting at least 4 cars will get tangled up in an incident, most likely on the first lap or on a restart. Thank you as always to those of you who have submitted predictions, whether you've been commenting for a while or have just started getting involved. I do read them all. Unfortunately, I can only pick a handful though to keep these videos short. The first prediction here from Marshall, saying more of a plea than a prediction, but please may the Blue Oval have a strong showing and T8 have an off weekend. And yeah, as I said, it is going to be hard to beat Red Bull. However, they also have a strong track record around Perth, and they had a pretty rough run of it by their standards, at least a couple of rounds ago. So they're not invincible. We'll see what happens, but yeah, curious to see what the order looks like on the top of the podium. The second prediction here from Jake saying, I reckon there'll be an incident at turn 6. It's usually a hot spot for action. This is a good shout out. Turn 6 is one of the hairier corners around this track. It's the second part of that sweeper off to the right. And I love the attitude of the Gen 3 cars for here. We often see massive slides. And as Jake points out, we can see some pretty big accidents as well if someone gets a bit of hip and shoulder through the apex of that right-hander. And then finally, Mabini here has a few predictions, but I actually want to focus on the second half, which is on the podium could be Reynolds, Winterbottom, Forward, Heimgartner, Stanaway, Randall, Wood, Moster, and or Kostecki. And as he rightly points out here, we are in a good spot. It does feel like Red Bull at the top step taken care of more often than not, but behind them, there's just so many drivers in contention. So there's good variety there, and fingers crossed we see that variety extend to the top step quite soon as well. Speaking of the top step, currently it's Will Brown who's leading the championship. His teammate isn't all that far behind though. Brock Feeney had a very strong showing in Darwin to start regaining his championship momentum. He's in second. Chaz Mostert had an off weekend, as I said, in Darwin, but he's still in touching distance there in third. Nick Percat doing a great job in fourth, as is James Golding. Cameron Ward is in sixth, Davidson in 7, and Anton De Pasquale in 8th. On the team side of things, it is looking a lot more dominant, though Red Bull lead the Constructors' Championship quite substantially over WAU in second. DJR actually surprised me to see them so close to WAU there in third. Pembrite are in fourth, and Tickford are in fifth, and you can see some of the other teams listed there on your screen. It's of course not just supercars though. We've got some good support categories lined up this weekend. Dunlop Series, as I said, Super 2, they're back on track this weekend. Porsche GT3 Cup Challenge will hit the road as well. And then the start of the GR Cup. This is the Toyota 86 Series and its new guys with its updated vehicle. They have a very late start to their season, but it does get underway in Townsville this weekend. And then finally, Aussie racing cars, always a blast. I thoroughly enjoy watching them, especially around a street circuit. So hopefully all that means we're in for an action-packed weekend. Whether you're watching on TV like me or heading trackside, enjoy the racing action this weekend. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Please drop a comment as well if you've got any thoughts. And of course, be sure to subscribe if you want to stick around and see my round review, which will be out in the days following the events. In the meantime, treat people like a trackside in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.